Hey team, me again. We're going to be looking at this deck building roguelike called Iris and the Giant today. Now, before I get too deep into the gameplay, I would like to talk a little bit about the game's aesthetic and theming. Now, I'm sure if you are watching the stream right now, you can tell that the game actually has a rather beautiful paper-cut sort of art style based on the developer's past experience making these pop-up paper books for children, which I think is a lot of the pull to play a game like this in the first place when much more technical but sort of gross-looking games exist. Now, while the theming may make you think that it's it's got some artistic undertones to it that'll really tug on your heartstrings, I have to say that the game's writing is,
From up here, I can hear them laughing at me. A storm awakens itself in me. My lungs fill with an immense sea of sorrow. I fall, I dive, and I depart.
ham-fisted is the way I'll say it politely. Now, I thought I'd get this out of the way first because I think this is the thing I actually have something to say about. Having conversations about topics like this can be difficult for a variety of reasons. And when you're doing the art for your game and the design for your game, and I have to imagine the programming for your game as well, it seems like the developer did a lot of the programming as well. But regardless, it's hard to have a vocabulary for discussing the kinds of issues you want to discuss when you're also developing the skills to do the art and the gameplay. Now, it's gonna be kind of cringe in some places if you are anything like me, which you might not be. Perhaps this still gets you where you live. But if you are, this is probably a barrier you have to get through before you can actually enjoy the gameplay, because for me the writing was almost so bad it's good.
Don't talk to her. She's an idiot. She can't even defend herself, see? Stupid, 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 stupid.
Which, again, isn't to the detriment of the developer, because I think they actually did a wonderful job with literally everything else. It's just that I think for the next one they could really use a full-time writer, or, at least some more time spent writing for a English audience, seeing as this is a French game. All that being said, Iris and the Giant is actually like a top-notch deck builder. At this point in time, I've actually probably played 9 or 10 different indie deck builders, and as far as these goes, it's mostly just Slay the Spire with different skins, right? Iris and the Giant is rather different in that there's not really so much a deck building aspect to it as it is I would almost say a deck sustaining aspect. The idea is that you are this little girl Iris who's having a terrible time from the sounds of it, and you're going through your inner turmoil, so to speak, which again I've mentioned earlier. As you go through, you have to fight these demons, and as you fight these demons, you play the cards you have in your deck. Now, you never get these cards back, and if your deck runs to 0, you die. The other thing is that none of these cards actually have very complicated effects. You only have about 4 or 5 basic card types, and then maybe 10 or 11 interesting cards which have stronger effects. The real complication comes from the fact that the enemies are kind of modular. You can have people with shields, or with armor, or with shields and armor. There are these different species of enemies that all do different effects on you, and you basically have to manage your turn so that Iris doesn't die. Iris can die, of course, by decking out, but you also have a limited life pool, which can get diminished by getting hit in the face, but can also be permanently cut if you don't manage your turns properly. I think this is really neat, because there's not really much deck building as much as this is like almost Into the Breach style puzzle every single turn of just trying to keep these guys away from you. As the game goes on, you get more and more of these relics, which make your items a bit stronger, and your basic cards, which I said as items earlier, can do more. For example, let you draw some cards, or they can let you attack more people. But at the same time, the enemies also get more specific as to how you have to beat them. For example, these guys have 2 armor, which means you need to hit them twice before you can even kill them in the first place. That's kind of hard to do when you have only 1 card to play in a turn, and there's 5 of them in front of you at any given time. What I find so interesting about Iris and the Giant is the fact that the gameplay is rather simple at a base level, but because of the way the runs progress, there's a lot of lose conditions that can sneak up on you, unlike in a game like Slay the Spire, where an encounter which you're just not prepared for can sweep you off your feet. Because of that, the game all the way from the beginning feels like a exercise in running a marathon as opposed to trying to sprint through each race. The individual battles aren't that hard, and you could probably survive through almost anything, but if you don't manage the cards you use per encounter properly, you can have a bad time. There are, of course, level up mechanics for when you beat up enough baddies, but is the level up worth as much as those cards would be worth later on when you're running low on attack? Maybe not, you know? In addition, the relics themselves also offer an interesting idea of trying to build towards a particular archetype. Now, this might seem like a appealing idea to like only have axes or swords, but because of the way the enemies are built, you kind of need everything if you want to try and take care of a normal level later on. If you don't have any bows, then you kind of can't deal with half the cast. If you don't have any magic, you can't deal with the other half of the cast, and so on and so forth. In the end, you try to specialize, but it can sort of come to your own detriment, which is an interesting trap which is laced into this game's design. The game actually has a lot of content as well for the cheapness of the title, where you have an original mode and a nightmare mode, which is your classic indie game difficulty shift. But there's also 3 different types of runs you can go on, which, to my knowledge, all have different enemy types. I've beaten the first one twice now, I think. Yeah, twice. But the second challenge is quite difficult, to the point where I just kind of threw my hands up in the air and said maybe later. The game's quite fun, and I probably would beat it later on, but for the most part I think that I'm kind of done with the game. Mostly because, as far as the initial gameplay curve goes, I think I've gotten to the point where I understand what's going on, and at this point I'll probably just be looking for good runs, which, you know, there isn't as much here as you would find in a lot of other deck builders, which would incentivize that kind of behavior. You're not going to get any nutty builds which can let you, like, you know, one turn the final boss or anything. This game's final boss is kind of a travesty, by the way. Just search up how to do it online. I spent like 40 minutes trying to beat him, and it's just like a gimmick. Kind of sucked, to be honest. So anyway, that's Iris and the Giant. I quite like it. If anything I said here seems interesting to you and you want to try and beat up these guys yourself, then, you know, give it a try, give it a spin. Otherwise, that's been me. Thanks.